then they don't have a website. They redirect their website to Amazon. Like, what? So they're like, we'll focus on brick and mortar. We'll redirect everything to Amazon, and Amazon pays them some kind of like tiny commission, right?
Stupid commission, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, I had, it wasn't even in my department. Like, I had chats with people like at much higher departments, and I was like, what are you guys doing? Like, Amazon's going to be your biggest competitor if they're not already, and you're sending them all your website traffic. Like, who came up with this idea? So I had a couple of those conversations, and they were unfortunately not going anywhere. And I was like, this is not gonna end.
Wild.
Good for you guys. And I had access. So I was working the finance team there, so I had access to all the financials. So Babies R Us, surprisingly, so they made money on Babies R Us because I think ultimately for your newborn, people spend crazy money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Toys R Us / Babies R Us, and they had Kids R Us back then too. They would white label all things. So they would get like a baby carriage or a stroller that cost Babies R Us, Toys R Us, cost them $20. They would sell it for $200. So they were doing okay there. Toys R Us was bleeding money, right? I think Walmart was eating most of their market share, but Amazon was also starting to, and they're literally sending their business, all their clients are sending to Amazon. Like,
all right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. We are very excited that you joined us. If you haven't tuned in, this is the show where we talk to celebrities, thought, and industry leaders to really discover their journey to success. I am super excited that you're joining us. This show is like no other. I can promise you that. You might laugh, you might cry, but you will definitely leave inspired and gain a whole new level of insight into those people that you follow, love, and admire.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. As always, excited for the conversation today. We have an individual. This background is going to be a lot of fun to walk through, so I know everyone's going to have a lot of fun with this. So born in Ukraine, cut his teeth working with companies such as Samsung, Walmart. This week's guest is an award-winning serial entrepreneur who went from starting out building websites in the early 90s, which will be fun to talk about, just like how different that was, to now managing over $100 million a year in advertising spends for his clients. He previously founded a web hosting company, as well as being the co-founder of the ad agency SmartSites. He's been featured in Inc. 5000 for 5 consecutive years, one of the fastest growing digital agencies, and has been featured in Businessweek's Top 25 Entrepreneurs, Bloomberg, Forbes, NPR, just to name a few. So please join me in welcoming the master of SEO and an ad and a newly minted advertising agency legend, Alex Melen. Alex, thank you for joining.
great to be here. That's probably the best intro I've had so far. That was great, Jake.
That's good, man. I like it. Hey, that's what we aim to please here, man. So I know it's like, well, the thing is, look, I know this as a CEO myself, right? That you've done a lot of cool shit, man. And the problem is when you're the CEO, you know, you always are looking ahead. You know, it's like next thing, and so hey, so we're gonna get into it, man. So people are gonna get to hear all the amazingness. So let's go back, as everyone knows on the show, we kind of started at the beginning. So born in Kyiv, and moved to New York at a like relatively early age, but I mean you spent enough time there. So talk a little bit about like what was it like growing up in the Ukraine, because again this is what like late, like mid to late, like this is 80s, right? Like early late 80s?
So I was born in 84. Family left in end of 90. So I came here 7/8. I think I was right before my birthday. I think pretty common story with the USSR. When the USSR broke apart, obviously anyone who could get out tried to get out.
Right.
It was a mess. I mean, I was very young there. I only went to, I think, kindergarten and maybe a little bit of first grade, but it was like a revolution, right? All the countries kind of revolted against the USSR and broke apart, and it was a scary time. And I'm obviously very glad and very fortunate that my family made the decision of literally dropping everything they had and moving to the U.S. with nothing, kind of a typical immigrant story, right? And came to New York City, which is also a very, very typical immigration point.
Yeah.
But yeah, very, very different for sure. And I'm sure so I was 7/8. for me, it was a little bit difficult, right? I still had to like learn English. At that, you're still young where you pick it up really quick, but it's not completely natural. So my brother is 6 years younger. For him, I think it was a lot easier. And I think obviously for my parents and grandparents, everyone who came over, probably the hardest, right? I think my parents, when they came over, geez, it was around 30 years old, right? I'm 37 now. I can't picture right now like picking up my entire family and moving to a country where I don't speak the language with like no money,
so they
nothing.
Spoke no
just
English.
Like,
they had no
English.
Wow.
No, I mean in school they had
little,
probably very, very basic. Probably even like going through the U.S. school systems. I took some Spanish classes. I have very basic Spanish. I think they had less English than I have Spanish. So obviously very, very basic, but it wasn't like a premeditated like 3-year like let's learn English and move. It was kind of like we got to get out. So it's and then I think the whole process is you apply to be allowed out, and a lot of people weren't allowed yet to do. So we were fortunate enough that we came straight to the U.S. A lot of people, especially if you take a year or two before 1990, like 89, 88, you had to go through Europe. So you had to go to Italy, live in Italy for 6 months. So luckily we went direct, but it was kind of you apply, and then if you get the permission to leave, you just drop everything and go. So yeah, I'm sure it was a lot more difficult for them than for me. At 7, 8 years old, I don't, obviously, other than changing schools a lot, I don't remember anything super difficult or impactful. But tough move. And that's the country's built on immigrants like that, whether it's first generation or a couple of generations back. That's, I think, a very, very common story.
Yeah. And so what was that transition? I mean, again, you're young enough to where, again, like you said, you started to pick it up. What was school like for you, as you're going into, so I mean, you're like, early elementary going through school. So,
so school was tough because we moved around a lot. So we first moved to Manhattan. So it was, we lived in Washington Heights, and it's actually on the border of Washington Heights and Harlem. And for those that are from the New York City area, that's not a very good place to be, right? It's a little bit better.
Especially early 90s. Yeah, especially early 90s. Now it's a little bit different, but
for sure. Now it's like luxury condos selling there for $1 million. But back then it was me, my brother, my parents, my grandparents, and my great grandmother in like 1.5 bedroom place in Washington Heights / Harlem. It was difficult. I mean, as a child, the children are very very moldable and flexible. So for me as a child, it wasn't super impactful, but I'm sure super difficult. And like you say, it wasn't back then. It wasn't a super safe place, right? If you think back to around then, they had the Rodney King protest. And I remember there was like snipers on the roof, right, and people flipping and burning cars, like those kind of images. I definitely remember. But aside from that, I think the most impactful was that I changed schools a lot. So second grade, I went to one school. Third grade, I went to a different one. Fourth grade, I went to a different one. Fifth grade, I went to a different one. So every year, completely moving and changing schools was obviously a little bit challenging, but I can't say it was much different from a lot of other people and stories I know from people immigrating in. But that was the thing that was impactful for me, where I felt the most change, where it was kind of changing entire environments every year. But it's I think product of the situation. And then eventually my parents moved to New Jersey. I think fifth grade I started, or half of fifth grade I started in New Jersey, and then been in New Jersey since, other than going to college.
Yeah. So all right. So move to New Jersey, go to high school. What was high school like for you?
By then it was a lot. Life was a lot more normal. So high school was good. I started my first business, I think, end of middle school, early high school. So I started T35 Hosting, which is I started at 13 years old. So
yeah, I have it like 99 or something. That says 13. What year was this then?
I registered. Yeah, so I registered it. So now I registered. I started in 1997. I registered as a business in 1999. So
how did you get into that, man? Like junior high, going into high school. Like how are you like? I mean, like think about that time. I mean, it's still so new. It's like you're getting your AOL CDs and shit. Then
yes, like that was pre AOL. That's CompuServe. That's 97.
Yeah, 93 would have been that. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's slightly pre AOL. Yeah, so you know what? I think I was fortunate enough. So my dad was in computer science back in Russia, and their initial initial program, right? It was just like in the 80s, obviously. What computer science was in the 80s is a lot different than people realize. That's like the big punch cards and everything, right? But he was in the computer science program in back in the USSR. So fortunately enough for me, a couple of years after we moved, and that's the profession my dad stayed in the US, but a couple of years after we moved, I was fortunate enough to have a computer in the house, right? My parents bought a computer, which probably was like their entire life savings, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And back then they were like I don't know, $2,000-$3,000, right? In 1992 money, which is like the equivalent of $5,000-$6,000 now.
Yeah. Do you remember what kind of computer it was? Was it a Commodore?
Yes.
Was it a
No,
Mac?
it was right after. It was an i386 was the first one. So it was I remember, and then upgraded to i486, and the difference was that the 386 everything was soldered in, so you can't upgrade anything. And then when the i486 came out, I think 92, 93, you could actually remove things, right? You could remove the RAM, you could remove the CPU. That's if you had computers back then, that's when the notorious turbo button was on the old computers, right? You could actually press a turbo button and your CPU would go from like 16 megahertz to 33 megahertz. But programs, like games and a lot of programs, weren't designed for specific speeds back then. So like some things would run too quick, and it was very, very wonky times. But I was fortunate enough to have that in the house, so I would actually like literally take it apart, right? And this is like my parents' entire like life savings that they've now worked 3 years for. It would come home, it would be like spread out in the living room. So I just had a lot of exposure, and hopefully I didn't cause too much financial chaos taking it apart, putting it together. But yes, I just had the opportunity to kind of be there as things were happening. And with my hosting business, it was kind of a necessity thing, right? So if you think back to that time, if you wanted to start a website, even as a person, let's say you want to start a regular website or even like a profile about you, right? Today you have like LinkedIn and Facebook, but back then those didn't exist. You want to have a page on the internet, this is me. There was really no good way to do it, right? Buying a domain was very expensive and cumbersome. That's back when Network Solution was the only one selling it. And then you have to host it somewhere, and there was nowhere to host it, right? Only the big ISPs were hosting it. So Bell Atlantic at the time, those kind of companies, and you have to pay them like thousands of dollars and wait like months. So the idea with T35 Hosting was to make a platform where people could get free web hosting instantly. Like they sign up and they have the web space and they make the web page. And now it sounds very simple, but back then it was revolutionary.
Yeah.
And this was a time, if you were around back then, GeoCities, Hypermart, Tripod. So I started T35 Hosting, I think, a month before GeoCities. GeoCities sold to Yahoo for $1 billion.
Yep.
GeoCities sold to Yahoo for more than Yahoo 10 years later sold themselves, right? It was a very, very wonky time. None of those companies exist anymore, by the way. GeoCities, Hypermart, Tripod, all of those. But that was around the time when all of that was happening, and it was really revolutionary to be able to offer someone a free way to make a website about themselves, and that later spawned MySpace, which was a platform specifically for that, and obviously everything else that followed that.
Yeah, and so, I mean, how did you decide, I mean, at that age, I mean, obviously you had some like interest in computers, like you said, your dad, but I guess it's like, how do you get that entrepreneur gene, you know, or like, what was it for you at that age that was like, hey, I want to like build this thing and maybe have a little side business here? Yeah,
so I mean, at that age, it wasn't even like side business, because it's like middle school, high school age, right? But it was literally just seeing the amount of opportunity and really revolutionary things that you could do with this new thing, the internet, right? And it's interesting, again, to a lot of conversations these days of just because I did all that and some other things, people are like, what do you see as the new thing, right? For whatever reason, I don't know whether it's more difficult now or just with age it becomes more difficult, but it feels like today it's not as clear, right, what the new big thing would be. For whatever reason, it seemed clearer to me back then, but back then it was super obvious that literally this is the future, right? Along with hosting, I had the first MP2 website, so that was before MP3s.
MP2. Wow.
MP2 was before MP3, so the biggest difference was compression was a lot worse. So they were 40 megs.
Sure, I can imagine.
And back then, 40 megs is something you download like over 24-hour period. But even then, it was I thought it was revolutionary, right? You could download any song you want. Sure. and then you keep it on a physical computer and play it whenever you want. And I remember even the teachers in school at the time were like, "This is silly. Who's going to sit on their computer and listen to music?" Right? There's definitely a big disconnect about all the potential I saw versus what other people were seeing. Obviously, in many ways, it was very hard to monetize on all of that at my age, right? I had contracts with companies to pay me for advertising, like, right? I had all these websites, and they would buy ad space, and then they would find out I'm like 13 years old, and they just wouldn't pay me because they knew legally the contract means nothing, right? So I had big brands that I would make deals with, and they would find out my age and then back out of it. So it was these days, I think the biggest change that I've seen is these days that's acceptable, right? These days, like 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds starting a big business is acceptable. Like back then, it was not viewed as positively, I would say, as it is now.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's funny. They're like, "Oh, wait, this is just a 13-year-old? Nah, we're not paying this kid anything."
They legally didn't have to, right? My signature meant nothing on the contract.
Oh,
nor would I get lawyers
though.
to try to dispute anything.
That's hardcore. So, all right. So then you get through high school, and then you end up at Babson, and in Babson, you focus on more of a business track. So obviously you've been doing so much with computers for so long. Tell me a little bit about that. Meaning, tell me about how you got into Babson, and then how you chose the business management side versus the information system side.
Yeah, so good question. So Babson's interesting. So for a while, I was even thinking I wasn't going to go a college route, right? Company's doing really well. I was mostly the company, but company was doing very well. We had on the free hosting side, I had 600,000 clients. I remember. The only reason that number sticks out is because I did an interview that's still online where I went through and screenshots showed it that it was 600,000 active users, went up to 1 million, right? So it was doing super well. I think towards the end of high school, the whole free hosting thing started imploding a little bit. And what I mean by that is there started to be a lot of abuse. So people making pages to steal information, hacking stuff, right? Like illegal stuff. I had a customer who made a website and distributed illegal versions of Microsoft Windows, right? And obviously Microsoft wasn't too happy about that. And going through the legal procedures of that, the court systems and everyone involved really didn't understand back then that I owned the server, but it was in my website, right? It was a customer's website. These days, it's a lot more clear, and with the passing of DMCA and a lot of things happen later on that made it clear. But so that was all of that stuff was very financially difficult, and as you could imagine, the court case went something like this, right? The judge goes, "What happened?" I say, "A customer hosted and distributed illegal versions of Windows." And he goes, "Well, where was this distributed from physically?" I'm like, "Well, this server that sits in this data center." He goes, "Who owns the server?" I'm like, "Well, I own the server." He's like, "Perfect, then you're responsible." So
wow.
After a couple of situations like that, the free hosting side of the business became more questionable, and with everything going on, it kind of made sense to at very least protect myself, right, by going to college, right? Protect myself meaning there's a backup plan other than me starting all these websites. And Babson just made a lot of sense because Babson is a entrepreneurial school. I think they're number one in entrepreneurship forever. They only have one major, so it wasn't like a lot of decisions in major. They have business administration. You could have specializations, but it's once you can't. It's funny. A lot of people go to college and they're not decided yet what they want to do, which is fine because you could switch majors. At Babson, like you're not switching in majors, and everything was like business focused. So even if you want to transfer, no one's got to take those credits, right? Because instead of accounting, it's like business accounting. But for me, it made a lot of sense. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do entrepreneurship.
Okay, got it.
I actually, amongst other schools I applied to, I got into a lot of them where they wanted me to do IT and programming stuff. So at the time,
that's what I wondered.
I was familiar probably, I don't know, I want to say every single programming language, but maybe some, like there's some fringe ones I learned, but like I knew a dozen of them. And a lot of schools offered me very good scholarships and everything to pursue that. And for whatever reason, it just, I was more interested in starting businesses, growing businesses, than necessarily like the coding.
Right, right.
And at that time, it was very hard to make that decision because, for my family, it was hard to understand, right? So I was going into business, right? In Russia and Soviet Union and communism, there's no business, right? You go into like engineering or something, and then eventually you grow to be a manager of something, right?
That's what I was wondering. What did your parents
There's no
think?
business. Yeah, there's no business. In Russia, there's no, at that time, and under communism, there's no business, right? You don't start your own business. That's kind of against socialism, communism, right?
Right.
So for them, it was certainly challenging to even understand that I'm going to business, and they're like, well, what are you going to graduate and do? I'm like, I'm going to do business. And it was like, conceptually, it was very hard for them because that's not how their entire world operated. So definitely went against the grain with that decision. But it was, and at that time, coding was starting to become popular. So this is when Bill Gates is all over the news.
Yeah.
If you saw the video, that's when like Windows 95 gets released and he's like on stage and like partying with Steve Ballmer.
Yeah, he's doing that dance. The classic dance move.
Yeah, so at that time, a lot of people, and this was a couple of years after, when not only do you have all that media, but now he's the super successful, and all the super successful people are like the guy, the Cisco, the CEO of Cisco, the CEO of Sun Microsystems, the Michael Dell. Those are kind of personas out there. So it was definitely not an easy move to kind of be like, I don't want to necessarily go that route. I'm going to go in business and see how that falls out. And specifically, I have a very good inclination towards math, so I just wound up going through the finance route. And in the business finance world, I think just at that time, the most prestigious thing to go into was finance and investment banking, right? This is
that's what I was wondering.
Pre-collapse.
Yeah, this is pre-collapse. This is like early 2000s, right? Like roughly like
exactly.
Early
so
2000s.
I graduated.
Like the high level.
2006.
Yeah, things are rolling until 2006. Perfect time to go into finance, right?
Perfect.
Right.
It seemed like it, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think that was the peak, right? So everyone wanted to be in investment banking. It was super, super, super difficult to even get interviews. I remember I did a first round. What did I do? Maybe Lehman, obviously before they collapsed. But I did a first round with like 500 candidates, and second round with like 100 candidates. Third round, they bring you in, like they fly you in when it's like 50 candidates. And ultimately, they hire like 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
So I went down that route. I did investment banking at Citigroup for a little bit. But it really wasn't for me, and nothing against people at the time. First of all, it's super prestigious, right? Second of all,
you had a few different roles, right? Citi. You were at Citi for a little bit, and then you went into like insurance, and then at Toys R Us, corporate finance analyst. So you were going down that,
Yeah, so I did my rounds, try to figure out what fits, right? So investment banking did not fit. Culturally, it was very, very different. First of all, nothing against people do it. It paid at that time, right? Coming out of college, I think they give you 60,000. It was 60,000 salary and then 60,000 guaranteed bonus, or 100% guaranteed bonus.
That's
so 120
coming out of college.
120, and then there's department bonus that you could make like tons more. So it was super, and everyone wanted to be in investment banking. That was like the thing to do. So, but the culture there was just I didn't like on the investment banking side specifically.
Right.
It was a lot of, I'll tell you, there's a lot of like incentive to screw over people you work with. Right.
Right.
And I think some of it has come across in movies and things along the way. Back then, it wasn't as obvious. But for example, your department gets a bonus that's split amongst everyone there, but based on how well you perform and how poorly someone else performs. So if someone comes to you for help, you're incentivized to give them the wrong answers, so they perform poorly, and you get more money. And we're not talking about like $1,000, $2,000, right? If you screw someone over, you might get an extra $50,000. So it's super incentivized, and it's pretty much you work. I think the whole investment banking program, it's becoming a little bit gentler. But I
For
think
sure.
the idea is you do it for 2 years until you burn out, and then you go and get your MBA and you come back as an associate, right?
That's exactly it. Consulting is very similar to that too.
Or you go to private equity or something. But they had a floor of beds where people would just go and sleep and then come back to work. So I won't bore you with all the details of that, but I tried a bunch of different finance stuff. After investment banking, I tried actuarial. So actuarial, I would and I still recommend to people who are mathematically inclined. So actuarial, and it's becoming more and more demand because actuarial is all calculation of risk. So insurance companies would always hire these people. But now it's even more important because currency risk probably touches every major company because as the world has become international. So that's all actuarial. And it's very slow paced compared to investment banking. And it pays very well. You take the 7 actuarial exams, they're difficult. But once you become an accredited actuary, even before you become one, you'll get 6 figures, and it's like a 9 to 5. It's not like a sit and everything's slow moving, right? I worked at Electric Insurance, which is a division of GE. We were calculating insurance premiums for 3 years into the future by trying to calculate risk based on all these factors. But it's like literally, what is it, 2022? In 2022, we'd be doing insurance rates for 25, right? So it's not like you have to, I have to stay late at these deadlines, right? It's very slow moving. So I did that for a little bit. It's a very good mathematically inclined position. Was also not really for me. And I still ran T35 Hosting during all this time. So I was kind of just trying to find something. So I jumped around finance for a bit, and then I did corporate finance.
T35 real quick. I want to we kind of over that after the Microsoft, like, so that didn't shut you down at least though. So like you're again this whole time like you're going through college, you're doing this thing on the side the whole time.
Yeah, I was sitting on the side. There were periods where I think one of the court cases ended with me having to shut it down and not allowed to run a similar business for 6 months. So I think there was a period where we shut down for a little bit, but not long term. And I pivoted to paid hosting, which even charging people $1, once you get someone's credit card, it's less likely that they're gonna try to create a weird/phishing/ malware website.
Sense. Yeah.
So that was the move. But of course, my general demographic for free hosting back then was probably similar to what TikTok is today, which is like 13, 14, 15-year-olds who don't have credit cards. So
right.
And you know, I think my whole challenge with T35 hosting is I grew it too conservatively. So there was a couple of times where I was offered for investment banks to come in and buy equity and grow the company. There's a couple private investors that approached me. I was hesitant to even hire people. I have very little staff. I pretty much did everything myself. And because of that, the industry kind of outgrew me by a huge margin. So in the beginning, I was a big chunk of the industry, and then 10 years later, I was 0%.
GoDaddy, all these other ones pop up.
Yeah, who like super scaled. And so for me, like even the marketing I did for T35 Hosting, I wanted a transactional ROI, right? So I spend $1 getting this person, and he's going to pay me $5 a month. So I'm positive month 1. GoDaddy operates with I think 8-year break even. So they spend so much on marketing that any customer they get, they will lose money on them the first 8 years, and they will make money on year 9. So it was just not my mindset. And it wasn't just GoDaddy. There were a bunch of companies around that kind of spread up really quickly like that, with thinking that they don't have to be profitable, right? So it kind of grew very quickly around, and now it's GoDaddy, and then there's a holding company called EIG that owns everyone else. So it's interesting. I used to speak at HostingCon, which great conference where all the hosting companies would go to. And it used to be like in the beginning, this like ragtag group, right? Like the actual founders of the company would go. And so I spoke at the first one when I was, again, like 14 or 15 or something. And then I took a big break from speaking just because it was always, could come back to it later, but public speaking was always the biggest challenge for me. So I did it once, and I'm like never again. But then
especially at that age, my gosh, like.
You know what? I think it's so public speaking. I think it's also a lot personality driven. I think for me, it It was just not for me. And these days I force myself to do it, and I do a lot of keynotes and everything, but I have to, more recently I started forcing myself. But the reason I tell that story, so I did the first hosting con, and then I took like a 15-year break, and then I'm like, when I restarted public speaking again, I think 2017, 5 years ago, something like that. I was like, you know what, I'll start it again. And luckily enough people know me in the industry, or less and less people know me from the hosting industry, but enough that if I asked to speak, they brought me in. So I spoke it turned out to be the last one. So it's like an hour before I go on stage, they like announce over the loudspeaker, this is going to be the last hosting con ever. And the reason for that is there's no companies left, right? So before there are all these companies and they had to advertise and compete and everything. So now you have GoDaddy, and then you have, I think it's called EIG, that literally owns every single
one and
other
one and all those
business.
other ones that had popped up.
They literally, let's see if I could get a list of what they own. Yeah, so here's EIG. They own literally, so they own iPage, JustHost, PowerWeb, PureHost. They own, there's a list if you Google it. They own Network Solutions now. They own everything. So there's literally like two like GoDaddy and EIG.
So no more HostCon because it's just two companies.
Yeah. So they did. There was like no reason for it anymore. So that was kind of sad. But yes, so T35 still runs. We do paid hosting. Have 0% market share, right? But
0.0000.
I'm sure it's like a rounding error, but it's a couple.
Still doing it, man. Still doing it. And what got you in then? So after you do that, you go into this digital manager. So then you go to MediaVest. And so talk to me about that transition, right? So you went from finance to media.
That was a big jump.
You're an analytics manager, and how do you get that job, right? Where it's like a big shift like that into the company managing pretty big accounts. Like, what was that shift like, and what made you want to get into that side?
Yeah, it's a good question. So right before that, I wound up doing corporate finance at Toys R Us, and so actually I was living in Boston, and someone I knew. So luckily I had all these contacts from back in the day. So someone I knew at Bain Capital. Back when they wanted to invest in T35 Hosting was like, we're taking Toys R Us private. You want a job in doing corporate finance, you could get an opportunity to move back to New Jersey and everything. So that's kind of how I landed there. And the idea with Toys R Us is they were going to take it private. They were going to make it better and and take public and make lots of money. Obviously, that didn't work out.
Didn't quite work.
So Toys R Us, I was there. All these jobs, I averaged like 6 months a job. At some point, I just found like I wasn't growing personally, right, and I'm not providing value. So it wasn't like I hated any of them, but like if I'm not developing and I'm not providing value, what am I wasting my time for? Why am I wasting the company's time for? But Toys R Us refused to do digital, right? So I'm this like digital, I don't want to say pioneer, but involved in the digital space forever. Right. I'm like super digital. Digital's important. Digital this, digital that. I landed at Toys R Us. Toys R Us doesn't have a website. So this is
2007, 2008 for everybday. Just so you guys know, like this isn't like 98 or 97. This is like late 2000s.
It's a late, this is, MediaVest, MediaVest/Publicis. I was 3 years and then started SmartSites. 2007. So it's probably 2006, 2007. So back then, they don't have a website. They redirect their website to Amazon. Like, what? So they're like, we'll focus on brick and mortar. We'll redirect everything to Amazon. And Amazon pays them some kind of like tiny commission, right?
Stupid commission, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, I remember I had, it wasn't even in my department. Like I had chats with people like at much, much higher departments. And I was like, what are you guys doing? Like Amazon's going to be your biggest competitor if they're not already. And you're sending them all your website traffic. Like who came up with this idea? So I had a couple of those conversations and they were unfortunately not going anywhere. And I was like, this is not going to end.
Wild.
Good for you guys. And I had access. So I was working the finance team there, so I had access to all the financials. So Babies R Us, surprisingly, so they made money on Babies R Us because I think ultimately for your newborn, people spend crazy money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Toys R Us/Babies R Us, and they had Kids R Us back then too. They would white label a lot of things. So they would get like a baby carriage or a stroller that cost Babies R Us, Toys R Us, cost them $20, they would sell it for $200. So they were doing okay there. Toys R Us was bleeding money, right? I think Walmart was eating most of their market share, but Amazon was also starting to, and they're literally sending their business, all their clients are sending to Amazon. Like,
That's
So
like
anyway.
we had. You'll appreciate this. We had on the show last month a woman, Shelly Arbishow. She's on a bunch of Fortune 500 boards now, but she was the CEO of Blockbuster in 2000, and she was in the room when Reed Hastings, with the president at the time, pitched bringing Blockbuster.com to life with like basically what was Netflix technology, and they said no. They're like, nah, we're just going to do it
crazy.
ourselves. And that story reminds me of it so much, of these companies that were the dominant brick and mortar player around something and just like completely not getting it,
Yeah, so I started, started looking around of what my next moves, right? And I was very attracted to, so before, I can't even say, I took a role doing digital marketing and analytics at MediaVest, which is part of Publicis, first on a Samsung account, and I was promoted to a Walmart account. But before, take a couple of years back, I don't think those positions existed. So I found it very interesting because it was all like website internet stuff. And now this new position existed, like digital marketing. And I'm like, geez, this is really, really interesting. It's not the finance I've been doing. It's not the degree I have, but this is the stuff I'm really interested in. And before it didn't exist at all. So I applied to a couple, and luckily, so the hiring manager and my boss at MediaVest later became Starcom MediaVest.
Starcom, yeah.
I don't even know their current iteration, but it's all rolls up to Publicis. So my hiring manager was Yakov Kemifield, and he was head of R&D, or like research. And it was funny that digital rolled up to him. Just because back then, and this is 11 years ago. It's 10, 11 years since I left, and I was there 3 years, so 14 years ago. But they had like nowhere to place digital, right? So MediaVest as a agency used to be Televest. They used to be one of the biggest television advertising agencies. They became MediaVest and then merged with Starcom, blah blah blah. But they were, as much as they were doing more and more digital, it wasn't like part of their core or nature. So weirdly, it rolled up to Yakov. He was great and gave me a lot of autonomy. And later on, I got to actually interview and hire people for my team. I had a lot of flexibility with that job just because it was so new. And specifically for Walmart, I remember they really just didn't care about digital. It was such an interesting thing to see, where digital was the lowest on their totem pole of advertising, right? They would spend more on billboards. So digital was, I think they spent like $1 billion back then, $1 billion on marketing per year. Digital was 10%. Billboards were like 12%. So it was all the way at the bottom. And they with 100 million, they were the biggest US online advertiser, right? We would go to like Yahoo, and especially for the holidays, be like, we'll take all your inventory. any like banners, whatever you have, we'll take it all. And we even ran some campaigns that didn't click anywhere because the goals for Walmart at the time, it changed a little bit right before I left, but especially when I started, the goal was to drive brick and mortar business. So we would buy like millions of dollars of advertising that would not be clickable. Like you couldn't click the ad, right? How crazy is that?
It's not that long ago too, which is the wild part.
Not that long
I mean, you're
ago.
talking 10, 11 years ago. It's like that was where we were at compared to where we're at today. It's just wild.
Yeah. And my goal on the digital advertising side was not to bring business to Walmart.com, but to increase awareness and bring brick and mortar business. So our goal was to increase top of mind awareness of Walmart from 99.1% to 99.4%. But the reason I stayed there, and really that was the only job I stayed for so long, and it was the hardest job to leave, honestly, is because the technology and everything that MediaVest and Publicis had at their disposal was really groundbreaking to me, right? They would do like, we would do these huge like lift studies, like lifts in awareness, and like
what is it?
Really cool
Millard Brown. Who's the
So we did a lot of Nielsen studies, we did a lot of ComScore studies, but it was first of all really cool advertising. We would doesn't sound crazy now, but at the time we would target specific individuals, right? So Walmart was about to roll out a grocery department.
I remember that. Yeah.
Before that, they didn't really have groceries. So they found out this is the age group and gender and income that we want to target. And we would actually do campaigns targeting those people on the internet. And at that time, it was really, really groundbreaking. And the only reason I started SmartSites, I started with my younger brother who was finishing Cornell at the time. And he had a SEO agency that he was running. And we kind of merged it. But from my end, the reason I left MediaVest, and it was probably one of the hardest things to do, is I saw this huge opportunity of all this really, really cool advertising that was being done for Walmart, Samsung, right? But no one else, right? Like your SMB, your small guys, definitely, like your roofer and plumber, right? They didn't even have websites for 11 years ago. Most of them didn't.
Yeah.
Now, like 75% do, but we're still not there. But this really, really cool advertising that was driving like amazing results that really no one was doing. And I remember for Samsung, they came to us. One of their phones they released. Jesus, Samsung Omni, I want to say something.
Wasn't the Razor? Was the Razor popping back then? I don't remember.
This was right past the Razor, and this was when Samsung was just gearing up. I think it was before their Galaxy line. I think it was Samsung Omni or something. But they came out with this phone. They did their own stuff, and it really didn't sell well. And the Publicis was doing all their marketing, so they came to us, and it fell to digital a little bit because they're like, this phone is really for the young consumer. We're gonna do this digitally, and we ran marketing campaigns that weren't even crazy. They threw like $100,000 to us, or like for them it was pennies, and it did like phenomenally. And I'm just looking at this, I'm like, this kind of stuff everyone should be doing. It shouldn't be just it wasn't even Fortune 500. It was like Fortune 100 companies.
Yeah.
So that was the idea with SmartSites, to start that and bring that kind of cutting edge tech, latest and greatest of everything to the small business owner. And at the time, certainly others were doing it, but it didn't seem like many were. And it was a huge opportunity that I felt it was big enough opportunity that I left my very stable, cushy job at MediaVest that I loved. I legit, like, that was the first time that after 6 months I didn't leave. So it was definitely a big jump I made.
Yeah, that's great. So, all right. So then you're like, all right, I'm going to do this on my own. You've always been an entrepreneur. You've been doing this on the side still to that point until you, obviously SmartSites. Yeah. So, again, like what were some of the early years like, and what was it like to kind of scale it to where it is today? What are some big memories you have or lessons learned over the last 10 years?
Yeah. So it was definitely, starting other businesses definitely gave me a little bit of comfort in doing that. Still, going from receiving a 6-figure paycheck to not having a paycheck is carries risk with it.
Of course.
So we started. My brother got a bunch of his friends from Cornell to also start with us. So we had a lot of really, really smart Cornell people who are now all over the place in really high positions. We have a guy at Facebook who helped develop Facebook messaging, like really, really smart people. And it was, it took us a little while to really zero in on our value add, which I think is normal. We kind of went in all different directions. We had a client that was an e-commerce business that our marketing really helped them. So we're like, let's start our own e-commerce business, right? So like next week we were like shipping product out. We bought a really good domain. We built a website. We knew that guy told us his contractors. So we called up the contractors. They were sending us inventory. We were like literally 1 week we were doing one thing. Next week we were e-commerce business shipping inventory out. And we had clients calling up complaining, I got an extra large shirt, but I need an extra large shirt. So we were definitely throwing darts in a lot of different directions, and ultimately kind of zeroed in on our core capabilities, which is building and marketing websites. But it definitely took a while. And as opposed to T35 Hosting, which I was kind of very conservative and afraid to grow, with SmartSites, my younger brother is a lot more, I would say, on the optimistic side, but on the growing things more aggressively than we should be growing side. And I'm probably on the other extreme. So the compromise in the middle worked out, and we've been growing it since. We're at 260 full-time employees right now in 6 offices worldwide, and we double in size every 18 months, pretty much on the dot. So this time, 18 months from now, we'll be at over 500 employees.
That's wild, man. I mean, obviously you've scaled it. What do you attribute the success now to? Again, to where you've had this kind of steady growth. What do you feel are some of the things that you guys have done differently, or some of the lessons you learned and adapted to get there?
Yeah. So, I think there's been tons of lessons along the way. I think as opposed to a lot of other agencies, we're very customer service focused, and that kind of reflects on our reputation. If you search SmartSites reviews or SmartSites, it's close to unmatched, I want to say, our reputation. But ultimately, we don't produce anything, right? We don't produce widgets or bottles or anything. We provide a service. Ultimately, it's our employees doing it. So any and all success, I for sure attest to our employees. And when I go on these kind of podcasts, and ultimately there's a question about challenges, I think the challenge for sure is growth, and growing from the size where you or any kind of owner could control everything to a point where you can't, and you really have to put the right people and the right processes in place. And that's a challenge to this day, right? Even growing from 250 to 500 is a huge undertaking. It's a lot harder than growing from 4 to 8, right? So that's where we're at, but it's continues to be.
What do you think? Why do you think it is? What do you think people find in you and your work that's so different?
Ultimately and hopefully it's literally the people and processes we put in place that produce that work, right? There's no mystery or anything proprietary. Like we do SEO, for example. It's one of our pillars. We do design, pay-per-click, SEO, and now CRO. But our three pillars used to be design, pay-per-click, SEO. Even with SEO, a lot of people sell SEO, like we'll do some mystery stuff and then you'll get some results, right? But I can't tell you what I'm doing. So our process is you buy hours and we tell you what we're doing with those hours. So with those hours, we're going to do content creation, we'll do outbound link building, and we show you what we do. So literally, we tell you how you could do SEO yourself, and then we'll do the part that you don't want to do. We could do the content writing more effectively than you can having someone in the US, hiring someone and paying them benefits, having them create content. So transparency, I think, is huge. I think that's something that was really lacking on the SEO side of the industry.
Especially in SEO, right? It's like...
Especially SEO, I go to conferences and it's all, people have such bad experiences. We're always like fighting bad experiences in SEO because it's always like a mystery box.
That's right.
Like, people don't know, like, oh, I've been paying for SEO. Like, do you know what kind of SEO? Because there's different kinds of SEO, right? Some companies only do content, some only do link building, some only do on-page. Do you know what kind of SEO we're doing? Oh, they don't tell me. Like, do you... How it's you measure results?
Don't worry. It's just SEO. It's some like SEO stuff, etc.
I'm like, how do you measure results? So like, oh, we don't really measure it. I Google myself to check my rankings once in a while. I'm like, that's terrible. Google is personalized. That's not how it works anymore. So yeah, transparency and obviously customer service, and really trying to instill that in all of our employees, and ultimately try and keep our employees happy as well, right? Happy employees means happy clients, usually.
Yeah, exactly. And so, as we start to kind of wrap up here, what's the next thing for you? So again, we won't get into what's the next thing on web. For me, look, I'll tell you what, a friend of ours, we went on vacation with this summer, they had the Oculus. Right. Yeah. And I used that for the first time. That was the only thing I asked for Christmas. That was it. I just want that. So I'm like, holy shit. This is, because what I was thinking, what I think about with that is especially like how we work. We stare at this green dot for Zoom all day, right? Or for these different things. Like, wouldn't it be way cooler to just put on a headset and then like you're here and we're kind of here and interacting? So I definitely think that there's something there. So we don't have to get into all of that, right? Yeah. We can do that on a different conversation. But for you specifically, what are you excited about? What are the things that you're excited about for both yourself or SmartSheets, et cetera?
Yeah, so it's tough. So I tend to be on the cutting edge with a lot of stuff. So I've been involved in the VR stuff for a long time also. And cryptocurrency, I've been involved when it was worth nothing and somehow managed not to make any money from it. So I'm always on the cutting edge with stuff, but it seems, I feel like it was so much clearer 10, 15 years ago. Like virtual reality, I thought it was going to be huge like 5, 6 years ago. Like I had the beta Oculus like before Facebook bought it, right? and I'm like, this is amazing. This for productivity, for meetings, for like meetings with doc. It was before COVID that really pushed everyone to that anyway.
Right.
And it really is taking a while to develop. So it's so hard to see what, like, for whatever reason, it was so much more clear to me in the 90s with the web than it is today.
There's so many different ways to go, man. I mean, it's just, there's so many different technology, again, if you think about VR, AR, blockchain, all these, it's like all of these are going to be critical.
And they all seem to be revolutionary to me, right? I was sitting with I was showing my kids the virtual reality thing a couple of years ago. I'm like, this is the future. We're in 2022, and yes, some people use it, but is it commonly used right now? No.
Yeah.
Supposedly, there's rumors that Apple has been working on an AR VR headset.
That's happening for sure.
And I think once that's out, maybe they'll push us, but it's tough. At this point, anything very forward-looking, I think, is very hard to predict, unfortunately. So we take a little bit of time. Surprisingly, websites and digital marketing is still super important. Is it going to be forever? Am I going to be making websites in the virtual space and buying virtual land for our office? Maybe, but it's so hard to tell at this point. I think for now, we're just trying to get as much companies as we can to the digital world. And surprisingly, they're not all there, right? We still have tons of roofers, plumbers who forever were word of mouth or got big business from the Yellow Page. A lot of these small businesses, by the way, all their names started with like A.
Yeah,
because
that's right.
back then it used to be in the Yellow Pages
or a number,
right? And you wanted the trick was to be at the start of the Yellow Pages.
That's right.
So there's still a lot of those people that were getting into the digital space, and really people who are not getting results from their marketing to make sure they are, and that they're doing the latest and greatest, and really helping them grow online. And with COVID and everything, it's more important than ever. Even if you're a successful retail store, these days you need to have an online presence, right? Even if 3 years ago you're okay, like I'm in the mall, I get foot traffic, I don't need it. COVID hits, now you do. So we're kind of taking it one step at a time. I think the demand will still be there for years to come, but also keeping an eye on the horizon. Maybe we will start making virtual websites. Who knows? The opportunities I think are endless. And we'll see what happens when Apple joins the AR/VR space. Maybe that's what we need in that space.
It might be, man. Yeah, they've started to talk about it, and like when it comes out, it's going to be pretty amazing. I think
I've heard that they've been working on it for a couple of years. And I know a couple of people involved in that project, but supposedly end of this year is when it's coming. But there was also a lot of rumors about Apple electric car coming this year. And I don't think that's happening. So take it all with a grain of salt.
All right, Alex. Well, look, man, I really enjoyed the conversation. I think there's some great stories in here and lessons for people. Just been really awesome to hear your story and talk through it, man. So appreciate you joining the show.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, man. All right. And we'll see everyone else next week on the Jake Dunlap Show.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another extremely fun and interesting episode. I thought it was fun and interesting, so I hope you did too, of the Jake Dunlap Show. Really great, just breaking down everything that makes people who they are, the success, the trials and errors, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, and make sure, more than anything, to go over to jakedunlap.com. That's where you're going to stay up to date on all the latest guests, additional details, prep notes. We're going to be sharing everything on jakedunlap.com. So go ahead, go over there. You can subscribe there as well too, and we will see you next week on the Jake Dunlap Show.